Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our HR 101 for Small Business webinar. I'm Janet Flaw with the Louisville Small Business Development Center, also known as the Louisville SBDC. We are partnering with SCORE of Louisville to bring you today's event. Both the SBDC and SCORE offer no-cost business assistance in the Louisville region, and we'll talk a little bit more about the SBDC in a moment. Before we get started, I wanted to give folks just a moment to connect with us and see if they're having any problems either on the audio end or the video end. What I've done on the screen is just offered an opportunity for folks to dial in, listen on the phone, because what we'll do today is actually record today's event and send that out to everyone. So even if anybody's having trouble with either, we'll have a finished product to send to you guys. If you are hearing us that are having trouble with the video, we want to suggest that you maybe shut down what you're viewing us in and maybe relaunch in a different browser, whether that be Firefox, Chrome, or Explorer sort of thing. Sometimes folks have better luck in a different platform, that sort of thing. While we give everyone a moment to take care of those issues, we'd like to share a little bit more about the SBDC. So we're located 614 West Main in the heart of downtown, but we do cover a 9-county region, and that starts in the Jefferson and Bullitt County areas and stretches east to Carroll and Owen County. So we've got a pretty large area that we're covering, and we only have 3 business consultants that do that. All 3 have extensive backgrounds in consulting and have over 25 years combined experience our service to the Small Business Development Center. They are Dave Etkin, our Center Director, and management consultants, Tony Sears and Valerie Henderson. We are funded by the Small Business Administration. A lot of folks are aware of that, but some folks may not be. But we're funded in part, the major funding comes from the Small Business Administration, federal agency. And then through the state, through the University of Kentucky, we also receive funding from them. And we receive additional support from the City of Louisville and Greater Louisville, Inc. If you're not familiar with our services, I want to let you know that we offer market research, opportunity assessments, and feasibility studies. We do business plan development and execution with you. We provide financial modeling and projections. And also we help in identifying pre-venture and growth capital that will meet your specific business needs. You can visit our website at louisvillesmallbusiness.com to request any one-on-one assistance and to see our other upcoming events. In addition, you can connect with us on social media. So we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're also on LinkedIn. We have a YouTube channel. But you can search all those under Louisville SBDC and just connect with us. Today, we welcome our guest presenter, and make sure we go to the next slide here. We have Jennifer Wheatley, who's the Vice President of HR Consulting and Outsourcing for HR Affiliates. Jennifer has over 25 years experience in HR and specifically in the manufacturing, distribution, banking, and retail industries. Prior to joining HR Affiliates, she was the president and owner of her own firm, Centerpoint HR. Jennifer, as you can see on the screen, holds a master's in human resource management and a bachelor's in business administration. She's also a SHRM senior certified professional and a certified senior professional in HR. She's a member of the National Society for Human Resource Management and in the Kentucky Society for Human Resources Management, where she serves on state council. Jennifer is also an adjunct professor at the University of Louisville, which is interesting considering we're funded by the University of Kentucky. I just want to say that out loud. So welcome, Jennifer, today.
Thank you, Janet. Well, welcome, everyone. So I hope that you're ready for an entertaining hour of exciting world of human resources management. And as Janet mentioned, I do have quite a bit of experience in the world of HR. As a matter of fact, I've spent my entire career in human resources. And I have worked with all sizes of organizations, from very, very large organizations such as JP Morgan Chase down to very, very small businesses. And I have to tell you, my favorite is working with the small business community. And because I think that it's such an exciting opportunity. I love to see the business owners creating just wonderful opportunities for employees. But I love to be able to work with them to really help them understand the human resources needs that every organization has. One of my partners often will say that as a small business owner, you have 10 things on your checklist that you have to get done, and human resources is number 11. So unfortunately, that often is the case. So we want to change that. We want to move human resources up to the top of your checklist. And so I wanted to start out with just giving you a little bit of, from my perspective, some reasons why you really should engage in good HR practices. And I'd like to preface that with saying that it really doesn't matter the size of your organization. So if you have 2 employees or you have 200 employees, it really doesn't matter. All businesses, and I often say it too, is once you hire that first employee, you need to start thinking about your human resources. So a few of the bullet points here that I wanted to kind of touch on is when you're thinking about why you want to engage in good HR practices, because it is critical. Employees are your number one asset. You can't do your jobs without your employees. And so, as you know, the labor market is extremely tight. And so hiring and retaining the best employees is crucial for your success. I have a small business now that have come to me and said that they cannot grow anymore because of people. If they had the people, they could triple their business. So hiring and retaining should be at the top of your priority list. And beyond that, it goes about building the best culture. And again, it doesn't matter what size organization you are, you really have the opportunity to create your culture. And when I talk about retaining people, it does go back to, what type of environment are you creating for those employees? Every employee has a major impact on your organization, as you know, and that can be good or bad. When I say major impact, that can be good impact or that can be a bad impact. We'll talk about bad impact later. We talk about conflict management and termination. So, the next one, it says, because you don't know what you don't know. And that's not a bad thing. You're a business owner, and you went into business because you had a passion. There was something that you wanted to do, but you probably weren't really thinking about the human resources impacts of that. And you're not expected to be an expert. That's where you need to outsource and find the people that can help you and provide that. But the world of HR, as we'll talk about in a little bit, is pretty complicated. So you don't need to take the time to study and learn all that yourself. Just make sure you partner with the right people. Obviously establishing policies and procedures. I see this a lot of times with small businesses. They're so busy building their business that they don't really think about the policies and developing procedures until way down the road. And what I tell my business owners is start when you're small. Go ahead and start putting some structure in place. It'll save you a lot of time and headaches down the road. And obviously, by establishing that infrastructure, just really give you the ability to scale and to grow. And last but not least, and we'll spend some time talking today about all the fun employment laws, but one of the things that, having good HR practices, I can guarantee you will help reduce your risk and avoid potential costly lawsuits. So that's really a key is we'll talk more about the employment laws in just a little bit. And today, we're going to give you a good overview, and from my perspective and being in human resources, what I try to do here is just touch on, because we only have an hour, we're going to hit some high level today on these topics, but I think if you take away some things for today, it's just these are the key points that I think will really help you from a business perspective. Again, it's hiring your employees and being able to keep them. We're going to touch on safety. I think a lot of business owners forget that it's their responsibility to create a safe environment for the employees. So we're just going to touch on that pretty briefly. I'll spend probably most of the time talking about the laws just because I think that's where I see a lot of small business owners really struggle, is just knowing what they have to do and what they have to comply with. We'll touch on keeping good records, how to make sure you're compensating your employees appropriately. Communication is a key, and I know you hear it all the time, it's probably a little cliche, but hey, everything boils down to communication, and if we don't communicate well, we're going to have problems, and employees need to know what you expect of them. And so we'll talk a little bit about that and providing feedback. Unfortunately, again, if you have 2 employees, you might have some conflict. So we'll talk through some ways to avoid that and making sure that you can resolve that. And then obviously at the end, we'll touch briefly on unfortunately, we sometimes have to terminate, and if we do, how do you do that effectively? So I have a saying, and if you know me, many of my people will hear me say this a lot, but I have this saying that says hire slow and fire fast. I did this presentation last week, and I was in with a bunch of people that were really struggling to find employees, and they said, well, we can't do that. We actually do the opposite. we hire fast and fire slow. And unfortunately, that's the sign of our times right now, is it's so hard to find good talent. We're quick to hire, and then because even when we hire them, you guys can probably all relate to this. Once we get them in there, well, we look at, well, it's better than nobody, so we tend to hold on to them a lot longer than we should. So I'm here to caution you on that, and even though in these hard times, I think you'll be better off if you'll take that and hire slow and terminate fast. And so here's some of the things that I see with our small business owners when they do begin hiring employees. And one of the first things is hiring out of desperation. And we do that. We have so many orders. We've got to get the product out the door. We have to service our customers. And because of the tight labor market, we do make some decisions that we probably wouldn't normally make. So I caution you, just, take a few minutes and say, is this really the right candidate for my organization? The next one is hiring without a clear job description. And I'm not saying as a small business that you have to have complicated 4-page job descriptions for all your employees, but having a basic definition of what that employee's job is going to be will help you a lot. Again, we talk about communication and expectations. A lot of it boils down to the employee just really didn't understand what their job description entailed. On that note, I get sometimes people say, well, I don't have a job description because I want to keep it flexible. Well, I understand that, and you can still have some flexibility. It doesn't mean just because you have that job description that you're tied 100% to that. There's ways to, we can still build flexibility in there. But again, the point is employees just need to have a clear understanding of what their job duties are going to be. Oftentimes business owners improvise the hiring process, and what I mean there is that we just tend to bring someone in, just get them hired without really giving them a good first experience. And all the statistics will show that most new employees leave within the first 6 months of being hired. And as you guys all know, turnover is expensive, and so take a little bit of time, and you'll hear me say this, and I'm not stereotyping, but if you read the articles, it'll tell you that the younger generations, they are expecting a lot more up front, and if they're not impressed with your organization immediately, they may not stay. They're really looking for, and there's a new terminology you hear a lot now, it's called the employee experience. It's much more just about an onboarding process. It's really the whole experience. And if they don't feel that it's what they want, they're going to leave. So take your time and make sure you have a good, consistent hiring process in place. Many of you may relate to this one, is hiring a mini-me. Sure, we all want to work with people just like us and who think like us. And there's some advantages to that. But I also will caution you is to hire people that play to the strengths that you don't necessarily have. So if me personally, I'm a great HR person, but I'm not so good at accounting. So I would probably want to make sure I hire a good accountant or somebody that's good with details. So you just be cautious of that and don't hire, and you want diverse opinions. That's how you're going to grow. So don't just have everybody looking or acting just like you. Here's the other one I'm seeing a lot right now is that as business owners, we want to be careful with our dollars. And so we want to get as much as we can out of our current workforce, and we don't want to hire. And so because hiring is expensive, obviously, but what does that do? Well, it creates stress on your current workforce. So I think you just want to, I caution you just to be careful and not to go too far. There's a nice balance, and just making sure that, if it's really time to hire that next employee, if you're starting to see your employees working a lot of hours, you see that they're getting stressed out, and you see productivity, decreasing, you really want to think about bringing in that next person. And the next one, not anticipating churn. And what I mean there is, unfortunately, you're going to lose people. It's just the nature of what we do. People move on. But what I've seen a lot of times with small businesses, especially small businesses, we're not ready for that. We don't have any kind of backup plan. Always have that plan B, because you never know, an employee will leave. And small businesses get so dependent on the staff that they have that they just are not prepared for that. So I always suggest to business owners is, just doesn't have to be anything formal, but have in your mind kind of a succession plan. What would you do if so-and-so left? How would you fill that position? How would you make sure that those duties get covered? So just keep that in mind. And the last one is probably something, and I'm seeing a lot of right now, and this happens with small businesses a lot, when you bring, you're creating new positions, bringing new employees on, you're not classifying them correctly. And what I mean by that is making sure that based upon their job duties, are they truly an exempt level employee, or are they an hourly employee? Or are they employee, or are they a contractor? I see a lot of small businesses think that they can save a lot of headache, or save time, save money by just hiring and classifying employees as independent contractors. Well, the IRS has some very specific rules around who's an employee and who's a contractor. So just be smart about that up front, making sure that you're correctly classifying employees, because if you misclassify someone, there can be some pretty large penalties and fines associated with that. All right, so last thing on just hiring and keeping the best. I think, again, take the time and effort to hire right. Just don't make any rash decisions. Just take your time, making sure you're really getting the right person. And when I say the right person, I'm talking about the right fit. And it's not necessarily just who has the best skills. It's who fits best in your culture, in your organization. So I've seen many times where we hire somebody truly for their skills, but they come in and they're just totally not the right fit for your organization. So I just take your time and make sure it's a good fit for your organization. Again, get creative. You're competing with a lot of other companies out there, and that's in everything that you do. And we'll talk about how you compensate, if you offer benefits, flexible work arrangements, whatever the case is. You want to make sure that your people want to come and work for you. Be a good manager. People truly leave managers. I can't overstate that. I've worked in organizations where the companies were best places to work and awesome organizations in totality, but there were pockets where there were not good managers, and people will not stay if they don't feel that they're being treated well by their direct manager. Recognize good work. I know it sounds easy, but you would be amazed at how we don't. We're quick to find the things that people aren't doing right, but we really should spend more time on recognizing employees and the good work. They all want to hear it, so take the time and recognize good work. I'm a big proponent of building relationships, and they truly do matter. Employees will stay if they feel that they're connected. If they feel they're connected to your organization, connected to you, connected to their manager, they're much more likely to stay at your organization. So take the time. I'm not talking about learning everything in details about their personal lives, but really just getting to know and getting to know people and making them feel a part of your organization. And the last one, I say this to business owners because sometimes we don't tend to listen because we're business owners. We know everything. We know what to do. So take a step back. Listen to your employees. Your employees have awesome ideas, and so take the time and listen to those ideas. All right, I'm not going to spend much time on this, but I just want to make sure everybody recognizes that as a small business, once you have one employee, you do need to think about safety. And, hopefully in your, whatever your business is, safety may be very, very simple, but just know that you do have to comply with all of the federal set standards regarding OSHA. Now, I put a bullet here about there's a lot of confusion around, well, so if I have less than 10 employees, so I'm exempt, aren't I? Well, you're exempt from OSHA reporting, but you're not exempt from following OSHA standards. And so it's just important to know that distinction. I think a lot of people forget that. Just if you have less than 10 employees, you don't have to fill out an OSHA log, but you do have to comply with the standards. There are some industries that are also exempt based upon their being a low hazard industry that I can give you more information on if needed later. There's also state OSHA plans. So there's the federal OSHA, and then there's also Kentucky OSHA. I think most of you are in Kentucky, so think about that. If you're not sure, this is a good area where it doesn't hurt to find out, what do I have to comply with from an OSHA standpoint. It's good to consult with an attorney on that. There is an OSHA small handbook that's available online. It's a great resource for a small business. If you want to make sure that you're in compliance, I would strongly recommend that you look for that resource. And again, the last one, as a business owner, everyone, you do have a responsibility to ensure that your employees are safe. All right, so let's get into the exciting world of employment law. I personally like it. People think I'm crazy, but I kind of enjoy the legal aspects of human resources. But if this graph, I think, will give you kind of a good indication of what has happened in our country back in the 1900s. There was just it's a case law and common law. And if you look at this was actually from 2011. There's actually an updated one I should have put in here. But you look at all of the possible employment laws that an organization has to comply with now. Now, don't fret. Depending on your size, we'll get to that in a minute. You may not have to comply with every one of those, but again, it's important to understand the world that you operate in today is very different, and so there is a lot of compliance that comes when you decide to go into business. So most employment law is based on employee size, and that's at the federal, the state, and even the local levels. So the first, what I want to talk about here is I've pointed out, I think, what are some of the major employment laws that all businesses must comply with, no matter your size. So if you have 2 employees, you have 5 employees, all the things that are listed on this slide, you do have to comply with. So I want to point out a couple of them. We're not going to be able to spend a ton of time on it, but I think it'd be good just to make you familiar with these. The first one is the FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's been around for a long time. And that is the law that really, I know everybody is familiar with overtime. You have to pay overtime. It's where we talk about exempt and non-exempt, that's where that comes into play. It's child labor laws, it's minimum wage. All of that comes through the Fair Labor Standards Act. And so all of you should need to make sure that you're complying with that. So, and it sounds pretty simple, but if your employees are working over 40 hours in a work week, you have to pay them overtime. And so then there's rules around what is a work week, how do you establish a work week, all those things come through the FLSA. The next one is the Immigration Reform and Control Act, and that is the act, and what everybody probably is familiar with is the I-9s. And I-9s, that law has been in effect since November 6th of 1986. So if you have any employees in your organization that were hired after that date, you should have a current I-9 form for those employees. And it's interesting. I go in and we audit a lot of small businesses, and it's amazing to me how non-compliant businesses are with the I-9 form. And yeah, I know. And being in HR, I just assume everybody does that, and but it's amazing. And then we recently did a audit of a company that has probably 250 employees, and out of the 250 I-9s that we audited, there were 2 that were right. So and their errors were all over the board, anywhere from just not even having an I-9 to administrative errors, not getting the proper documentation. There's a myriad of things that can happen with I-9 forms. So if you don't have I-9 forms for your employees, you need to make sure that you get those. But there again, there's some rules around how to do that. So it's definitely something you want to seek some advice on. ERISA, if you offer benefits, you have to comply with ERISA. So if you don't offer benefits, you don't have a pension plan, you're okay. But if you offer any type of businesses, then you do have to comply with the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. So just be aware of that, and there's certain regulations around it once you do have benefits. Obviously, I'm assuming most of you probably have a payroll provider, so you just want to make sure that the appropriate amount of federal taxes and Social Security taxes are coming out. The next one, people forget about, I think, but it is the Equal Pay Act. And in essence, what that says, if you have two people in the exact same job and same experience, everything, they need to be paid the same. So you can't pay a female less than a male just based on there has to be reasons for that. So that's where that law comes from. The Employee Polygraph Protection Act, I won't spend time too much there, but what my blanket statement is, don't do it unless without consulting an attorney. There's very few instances where an employer should be conducting employee polygraphs on their employees. The next one is HIPAA. Most of you are probably familiar with that. That's the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, and that's basically has to do with protection of private information, healthcare information, and so just if you it also comes to just making sure that you're keeping employee data confidential. The next one is the Jury System Improvement Act. I get asked this sometimes, believe it or not, but in essence, you can't fire an employee if they need to go on jury duty. Believe it or not, people think, well, I can't be without that employee for 2 weeks or whatever the case is. Well, don't do that. They're protected under the law. So just be aware that there is laws around that. I didn't put on here too, but there's voting. There's also laws around voting. So you want to make sure in Kentucky, the law says you have to allow them up to four hours to vote. So you want to make sure that you're complying with that. The next one is the National Labor Relations Act. And most people associate this with union, and basically what the act says is that employees have the right to unionize, to bargain in good faith. But where it really impacts and where I see most of the issues come up, several years ago, the National Labor Relations Act came out and said employees have a right to talk about any terms or condition of their employment without fear of reprisal. And so what that basically means is that if two employees are talking about their wages with each other, you can't terminate them for that. And that's the broad version of it. But in essence, that's what the law says now. So I can remember back in the day when we'd have handbooks and they'd actually say, if you talk about your wages, you'll be terminated. You can't do that anymore. So that's where the National Labor Relations Act comes into play. And the last one on here is just this is the uniform security. This is really protects military personnel in essence, and without going into a lot, it's a long law, but in essence, if you have an employee that's a member of the military, they do have job protection rights. There's very specific rights that they have for up to 5 years. So again, it's just important to know if you had one of your employees in the military and they need to take leave to serve in the military, you need to be careful in how you handle their leave. All right. So all those laws I just talked about, any size employer has to comply with. So I wanted to bring to attention as your organization grows and you add employees, when you hit 15 employees, there's some other laws that come into play. And this is, everybody's probably familiar with the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And that's just the major legislation that came out that protects people. It's where we talk about the discrimination. So you can't be discriminated against based on your protected class, and that's your race, sex, religion, et cetera, national origin, et cetera. All that, if you have 15 or more employees from a federal level, they're protected. There's also the ADA, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act, that comes into play at 15. And there's also the Pregnancy Discrimination Act at 15 employees. And then at 20 employees, from a federal perspective, you need to also be concerned about the ADEA, which is the Age Discrimination Employment Act, or the Older Workers Benefits Protection Act, because at 20 employees, so if you have employees in your organization, you have more than 20 employees, if you have anybody in your organization that is 40 or older, they are protected under the law. So doesn't mean that if you have somebody's over 40 not performing that you can't take action, but again, you just have to understand that there's laws that do protect them. And then there's also COBRA. So if you have more than 20 employees and you provide health care, you have to comply with the COBRA regulations. I wanted just to point this out because I think sometimes employees forget this. They're more familiar with what has to happen on a federal level, but there's also things from a state and local perspective. And so in the state of Kentucky, so federally, I just mentioned that Civil Rights Act is at 15 employees, but in the state of Kentucky, if you have 8 or more employees, you're required to comply with the Kentucky state civil rights. So all those protected classes that I mentioned before, at 8 employees in the state of Kentucky, they're covered. And then there's also local civil rights law. For example, in Louisville and Jefferson County, if you have 2 or more employees, you are they have protections under the local civil rights law. And I like to point that out. So people ask me all the time, well, what does that mean exactly? So, well, if you had an employee in the city of Louisville or Jefferson County, and they felt that you were discriminating against them based on one of their protected classes, let's say you have 5 employees in your organization. They cannot sue you per se in state court or in federal court, but they could go to the local Louisville Human Rights Commission, and they can file a charge there. So it really just depends on where they can pursue legal activities against you. So again, I just caution and make sure. And one of the things that, if you think for local Civil Rights Act, under the federal law right now, there's a lot of controversy around sexual orientation and the sexual orientation of protected class. And technically, federally, it's not. However, the EEOC feels differently, and the EEOC feels it is a protected class, and there's a lot of argument back and forth on that. But what I will say is when there's several localities in the state of Kentucky, I think it's up to 8 or 9 now, that do protect sexual orientation. Louisville, Jefferson County happens to be one of them. So in the city, based sexual orientation is a protected class. So again, my last bullet point there is just really, it's just important to make sure that you know the laws where you operate. And just a couple other things as if you didn't have enough to think about, a couple other things that I do think you want to think about as an employer. Many of my clients, many employers obviously do background checks, and it's perfectly fine. And you're right, you can do background checks, but if you do them, there's some specific procedures around doing them. And if you're going to do a background check, you must comply with all of the rules with the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And that means from getting authorization, what you do with the information before you take any type of adverse action. There's very specific steps that you have to take with a background check. So again, if you do those, you just want to make sure that you're working with someone that can help you through the Fair Credit Reporting Act. The next one is drug testing. I'm getting a lot of questions and concerns around drug testing. There's various different schools of thought, but with all of the, what am I trying to say, not controversy, all the conversation around drug testing and cannabis, specifically marijuana, I'm getting a lot of questions about, should we drug test or not? You certainly don't have to, unless you're in a DOT, a safety sensitive position, but there probably are some, compelling arguments to do that, but you want to make sure that you have a very complete policy around the drug testing. There are a lot of protections. Once you decide you are going to drug test, and there's a lot of rules and regulations around how you drug test. So if you're thinking about it, or if you do that, you want to make sure that you're just following the right procedures. The other one that comes up a lot is around, it's the Consumer Credit Protection Act. And I put in parentheses garnishments because that's typically where it affects employers. There's some very specific rules around what you're responsible for and what you can do if an employee has a garnishment. So if you have any employees and that ever comes up, just make sure that you review kind of the rules around what you can do with garnishments. And the last thing is Kentucky labor laws when it comes to the wage and hour. I would recommend that you go back, if you haven't, and just kind of look at your procedures around these 3 particular things, and that's rest breaks and meal periods. In the state of Kentucky, there's very specific rules around these 2 things, around rest breaks and meal periods. Many states don't have any rules around it all. It's not federal. It's not from a federal rest break. The federal, they don't weigh in on it, but it's state driven. And so Kentucky happens to be one of those states that puts emphasis on it, and there's specific rules. So if you haven't looked at that, I would recommend you go back and visit that, because there's a lot of employees, if employees get upset about things, that's one of the bigger complaints that they have is around that. And the next one is overtime. Please make sure that you're properly compensating your employees that are working over 40 hours in a work week. And again, it's establishing what a work week is. One of the things I've seen lately is I've got some small businesses who want to share employees. And I've got a company that they're 2 different businesses, but they're under one FEIN. They're just kind of separate. And you have to be careful around that because it really depends. So even if you're working a separate location, but it's under the same entity, it happens sometimes in the restaurant industry and hospitality. 40 hours in the work week is overtime. And the last one is payment of wages upon termination. And I bring this up because I see a lot of issues around managers. When an employee quits, managers get mad, or they have equipment that belongs to the company and they want it back, so they're going to hold their paycheck until they return it. Kentucky's very specific on when wages have to be paid upon termination, and so you cannot hold an employee's paycheck in order to retrieve equipment, and it has to be paid within a certain time frame. So just again, other things to think about when it comes to Kentucky wage and hour laws.
Let me ask real quick. So we're hearing a lot of scarce pool of potential employees, that sort of thing. And we're hearing now about the practice of ghosting sort of thing. So how does it work from the opposite end if you have someone who quits on you, just like disappears, which you're still obligated to pay their wages for time that they've worked.
That's correct. So yes, and it does happen. Employees just decide they've got a better opportunity, or they just decide they don't need to work tomorrow. So you just never hear from them again.
Just gone.
It does. It happens a lot, and you are still responsible for paying them for all wages or for all hours worked. Regardless, and then you're responsible for ensuring that they get that paycheck. So you can't hold it on to it indefinitely. You need to make sure that that's paid to them and they're taken care of. Again, that's where it comes in, usually where they want to hold their paycheck to get something back. Sometimes it comes up, somebody's got computer equipment, something like that. There's other means to pursue getting back that equipment. It's just not holding their paycheck hostage to get it. All right, so let's briefly talk about keeping good records. And this is something I think too employers sometimes don't do, but once you start having employees, you do need to make sure you have you keep some personnel files for them, and there's some rules around what you should have in a personnel file. And you should keep medical information separate from a personnel file, and you should keep I-9 forms separate from the personnel file. So some good practices around, but you do want to maintain an employee file for every employee. Obviously, keeping time records. We talked about wage and hour. Your best defense is your time records. So whatever, it can be handwritten as long as the employee signs it. Whatever means that you're using, you want to make sure you are capturing attendance and time records for your employees. And if you do offer benefits, keeping track of what they've been offered, when they were offered, what their coverages are is important. Obviously, if you have an accident, employee injury, you want to make sure that you have injury reports on hand. And of course, your tax records need to be kept. I put a bullet point on here, keep them clean. And why I put that on there is oftentimes we write stuff on applications, on resumes, things that probably notes that shouldn't be on there. So I recommend that just don't write things that you don't want that somebody could come and discover later. So keep your notes clean, keep your files and your records clean, and don't put anything that shouldn't be on there. Know the retention requirements. There's very specific retention requirements for everything, from safety records to personnel files to time records. So make sure that you have a good retention schedule and understand what the requirements are. And I'm a firm believer, keep everything that you have to, but don't keep anything that you don't have to. I've seen companies have 30 years of employment records, and it's just really not necessary. So, but just understand what those retention requirements are. And the last one I have on here is considered employee handbook. Even for small companies, you don't need a 60-page employee manual, but it's always a good idea to have some type of basic document in place that sets expectations for employees, gives them access to the information, and also helps managers be able to manage their employees. So I strongly recommend that you have some type of employee handbook in place for your employees. Now, real quickly, I get asked a lot, well, how do I know if I'm paying people correctly? You know, I'm paying $10 an hour, and I just saw that, excuse me, Walmart went to 11. So do I need, what's the right amount of money? So, you know, there's obviously there's a lot of things that you can do, but this is a time where you might want to really do some research. And work with someone like us, a consulting firm or somebody, to get you some information around what makes sense from a salary perspective. Because even though I talked about all the wonderful things that you have to do as an employer, salary is still, as the saying goes, cash is king. It's still, people want to be paid fairly, and people will leave if they're not compensated appropriately. So make sure that you've got some good understanding around what the market requires for every job that you have within your organization. If you know, small companies a lot of times don't offer benefits, and the law doesn't say that you have to offer, well, unless you certain things, but you know, you really don't have to offer vacation and holiday. But if you don't, you may not be able to attract and retain them. So you want to think about you know, what benefits that you can afford to offer to attract and retain your employees. Perks, you know, what I'm seeing today is employees expect a lot more than just a salary and a benefits package. They're looking for lots of things. They're looking for flexibility. They're looking for organization that cares about the community, who's involved, who is just, they're looking just for a lot more than they ever have before. So I think you want to start thinking about what can you do to add some value and some fun and some just other things that maybe other organizations aren't doing in order to keep those employees. You know, I've got a client right now that has, they're allowed to bring their dogs to work. And you would not believe what a great benefit people love that they can bring their dogs to work every day. So get creative and think about what else you can do to set yourself apart and be competitive with other organizations.
Sometimes those things don't really cost you. I mean, you know,
that's exactly right.
Monetarily, they will cost you in order to make those things happen.
Absolutely.
Attractive.
And as a small business, you may not be able to pay top of the line salaries. So what are some other things that you can do? Well, maybe I can't pay as well, but hey, if I can let my employees bring their dogs to work and that makes them happy, why not? So again, you know, get creative and look at the total package. Just a couple other things that I like to just to touch on, and really I mentioned it earlier, but communication really is key. And where I see things break down often between employees and managers, it really boils down to just employees not understanding expectations and managers maybe not doing a great job setting expectations. So, you know, keep employees informed on your business. Employees truly want to know. They want to be involved. They want to know what's going on in your business. So as much as you possibly can, share the information that you can. I know that sometimes in business we don't want to share everything, and we can't, but what you can share, you should. Let them know what the projections are over the next few months and where you expect to be in a year. Anything, you know, how you did last month, you know, all those things that you can, you know, do share. Employees want to know how they fit into the organization. They really do. And they want to know, you know, just why am I doing this job? What is this? What value does this add to the organization? They you know, it sounds a little funny, but they truly do want to know how they fit in. And you know, and employees, it's funny, all the years, this still goes down. People do want to know, well, what's it mean to do a good job? You know, if you say I'm doing a good job, what does that look like? So just be open and make sure employees understand what the expectations are from a performance perspective. And then the last one is communicate often, both the good and the not so good stuff. We oftentimes, I think, tend to focus on the negative and what didn't work. But what about all the wonderful, fabulous things that happen every day in your organization? Do your employees know that? So make sure that you're celebrating successes as well as talking about the things that you need to improve upon. Everybody loves this slide. Feedback is important. I've never known an employee in all my years. I've never known an employee who truly really didn't want to know where they stand. Now, some people might hide behind it, but in essence, people really want to know where they stand. They want, and I know sometimes we run into those employees that you think, I don't know, but people do want to do a good job. And they truly do, and they want to contribute. So make sure that you provide the feedback. Make sure that they know. Employees want to know how you view them. What are my strengths? Where can I improve upon? So I know those aren't always easy conversations, and we get busy in our day-to-day, and we just put it to the side and we don't do it. But people do want to know. I get asked a lot about performance and management and doing performance appraisals, and there's lots of different schools of thought. And there's nothing worse than a bad performance appraisal. And when I say bad, I mean just it's not effective. It doesn't really get to the heart of what people. It doesn't have to be a formal, fancy process. Just make sure have a regular feedback session with your employees so they know where they stand. And they really do want to hear that they're doing a good job. And oh my goodness, they really love to hear thank you. Speaking of not costing anything, saying thank you does not cost. And it doesn't even hurt. So take the time and then my last bullet, I think this is, so do you appreciate your employees? I ask business owners all the time. I said, do you appreciate your employees? Well, of course I do. I absolutely appreciate my employees. So then I look at them and I said, well, do they know it? And if you really think through that, I bet you, and if I went out and surveyed employees within your organization, some of them may say, well, no, I don't do that. So I love this visual because this could be a whole webinar in itself, but I think this kind of describes what happens a lot of times is on the surface and above everything looks great, right? Looks pretty, looks like everything's fine, beautiful picture, but it's what's going on underneath is a huge ice storm, right? Iceberg. So we need to, and that's kind of how conflict arises in organizations. People don't just come right out and say, hey, I'm upset. People will bottle it up. They won't talk about it. But all this stuff is stirring inside of them, and then what happens is then either something's going to happen with your employees. They're either going to blow up and get upset, they're going to quit, or they're just going to stay there and not produce. So again, if you want to go to the next slide, it's really, you want to resolve conflict and be fair. And I tell people this all the time, we tend to avoid conflict. Most people avoid conflict because it's not fun, it's difficult. So we sweep it under the rug. But eventually that rug is going to get pretty high because the stuff doesn't go away, right? It's there and there, just keeps building up. So I say the best is to address it head on. And remember, conflict, not all conflict is bad. Remember earlier when I said hire people who don't hire mini me's of you, hire people who are different because you want the diverse opinions. And so you might have conflict when you have diverse opinions, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's all bad. And again, I can't overemphasize this, but I think the lack of communication is often the source of conflict. It's just people don't understand each other or just haven't communicated what the expectations are. So again, goes back to making sure you're communicating. Again, address it head on. It usually won't go away. It just usually builds up and gets worse. And go directly to the source. I often hear this a lot. Well, you know, you hear something's going on from other people, or you kind of address it third party. But just go, if you hear something brewing, or you hear that maybe an employee's not happy about something, go directly to that employee and and just be open and initiate a conversation.
I used to have an employer or a manager specifically, that there was something that was going on in the group that had become an issue, and also their method of dealing with it was, oh, there's this new policy that now affects everybody, and you're like, well, there's only just one person that's having this issue. Why are we all now, this brand new policy?
That is so common. And usually the employees know who the one that's...
Yeah, you knew what the problem was and everything
Yes.
like that. And then probably within 6 months, that person was gone.
Yes. That's
like,
an example where a manager, it's hard. It's hard to sit down one-on-one and have a conversation. So it's easier just to address it vague terms in a group, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh no, and this last one, be open-minded. I hate to say that, but you might be wrong. Nobody likes to admit it, but there, oftentimes, you need just to kind of sit back, look at it from a different perspective, and just really be open-minded about it. Oh, one more, and come to a resolution. This, I see this a lot where we don't end the conversation with a resolution. We air our grievances maybe, but we really don't. Doesn't get really resolved. So two people will leave that office and nothing really changes. So make sure there's some agreement on what the resolution is going to be, and then follow up. Don't be afraid to approach it, 2 weeks later, say, hey, I just want to touch base with you. How are things going? Are things better? Just address it head on. All right, last but not least, and I'll go through this very quickly, but it's unfortunately sometimes we do have to end up terminating employees, and if you want, you can go ahead and do these because there's quite a few of them. But I just want to kind of if you do get to the point where termination is inevitable, you want to make sure you handle it correctly. And the reason this is where a lot of litigation comes from is for employees when they're not handled appropriately at the time of termination. So I put some do's and don'ts, and there's 2 slides of this, but just a couple of things. Don't fire on the spot. Take your time. Make sure that you handle it appropriately. I've got managers. A lot of times, managers will say, "Hey, I need to fire this person right now." Well, you know what? I always recommend let's suspend the employee, and then we'll come back. Let's make sure that we're thinking clearly before we make that decision. So, anyway, I won't go through all these. Don't fire people in public. I know that sounds silly, but you wouldn't believe that I see it happen a lot where some manager would tell an employee they're fired right in front of everybody. So handle it. Just handle terminations cautiously. One of the things that I always tell you, if you get to the situation and people look at me sometimes, but I'll say, don't tell an employee when they're fired that you're sorry. And because typically the employee was fired for something that they have done. And as long as you feel you've done everything that you can, really you shouldn't tell the employee that you're sorry. But I won't go through all those just for lack of time, but you can see those. You're going to send us.
And yeah, like I said, we'll send the recording of today's event so you can stop and review them individually. Perfect.
So just in summary, again, just some things as a small business owner, I think from an HR perspective, again, be selective when you're hiring. Do everything you can to create a great first impression. You'll retain them longer. Again, focus on keeping the good ones. Know the laws, the employment laws, and make sure you're complying. Communicate often and effectively. Give employees feedback, and obviously, if necessary to terminate, proceed cautiously. And then I put a quote on the last one. I think this is a great way to end. Is just from an HR perspective, it's a lot easier to put infrastructure in right now than it will ever be again. I don't care if you're 2 people, 20 people, or 200 people. Wherever you are today, it's never going to get easier than it is right now. And I think that's really true from an HR perspective for all small or all businesses.
So we're going to give everyone a moment to ask any questions you might have. You'll see, you should see on your dashboard a space that says chat, and so you can type that in there. And while we give you a moment to do that, we're going to go just visit real quickly HR Affiliates website and let Jennifer just talk about, as far as contacting them for help.
Sure. So as she mentioned earlier, HR Affiliates, we are a full service human resources consulting and outsourcing firm, and we work with employers of all sizes, primarily in the small business sector, anywhere from, we have clients that have 2 employees all the way up to, a couple hundred. But we can work with you on anything in the employee life cycle. Can you click on that employee life cycle button there?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it should. There. So if you scroll down, this is all the things that we can help with, anywhere from recruiting, hiring, training, motivation, compensation, benefits, conflict resolution, and termination. So it's really the full. We handle everything from beginning to end when it comes to your employees. So we have a great section with a blog. So if there's lots of different great articles out there, feel free to visit that. And the HR 911 button, everybody loves that. Because oftentimes employers call us when they have an emergency. They've got an employee who's not acting well. They need to terminate someone. So we get a lot of those 911s. But there's ways to contact us, and you can use a button there. So feel free to reach out to us at any time.
And you see that's hraffiliates.com is their website there. Also, while we give you one more second to maybe put that together as far as a question goes, this dashboard ends up in a weird spot. I will also point out our website here at LouisvilleSmallBusiness.com. We have some upcoming not webinars necessarily, but workshops and events. So if you go to our resources workshops page, you'll see we have we started a business plan boot camp last weekend. We'll finish that up this weekend, and there we are today for our webinar. We also have a series event coming up in February. It's the Ultimate Marketing Plan. It's 3 Saturdays, a total of 9 hours of program that we'll be delivering. We'll start from the bottom up and creating a customer persona to how to build your brand, and actually putting in an actual plan of action for your marketing plan. And we have Iffy Witzel, who's doing that from Red Eye Marketing, and she has several guest speakers that are coming in to do that. So I want to just encourage you to go look at that as a possibility for creating your marketing plan. It's only $49, and you can bring a friend for free at that. Like I said, 9 hours of training. It's great. So I don't see any actual questions come up for us, but I did want to point out that Jennifer is going to join us for additional webinars throughout the year. We're going to drill deeper into some of the subject matters that we've talked about today, and we look forward to that. So just kind of keep an eye out for our any email that we send out that tells you to register for those classes, and we'll be featuring those in our newsletters, those dates in our newsletters and such. So thank you, Jennifer, for joining us today. Absolutely. It was really informative, and it's such a vast subject
matter.
I
know. There's so much to cover.
I know. Gosh. And so we don't want you guys to feel too overwhelmed. There's help out there to guide you through that. And obviously
really creating awareness,
yes,
I think was the goal for today.
Have you seen like the major change over the 25 years is the legislation, the laws?
Yes,
change.
That's a big one, and I think I think the other thing is just the workplace, the cultures in the workplace, and with all the different generations, I think in the workplace. I think
Sure.
things, the expectations in the workplace are very different than they were 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Well, we thank you guys for joining us again. I will work on editing today's webinar. I'll put together a online evaluation. We'll ask you to fill that out for us, and also provide you with Jennifer's contact information should you have any specific questions you want to ask to her individually. So thank you again. We look forward to you joining us in the future, guys. Thanks so much.